Okay, today's chapter is about ethics or ethics in business. How do you define ethics? What do you think about when you think of the term word ethics? Being ethical, what does that mean? What does it mean for you as a student? How are you an ethical student? Matt?
Doing the right thing.
Doing the right thing, yes. It means, and it's very good that you said doing the right thing, because a lot of the big problem with ethics is people know what's the right thing to do, but they don't do the right thing, right? Yeah. Most of the time, we know what is the right thing to do. Give me one thing that what you should do or not do to be an ethical student, to apply ethics while you're in college. Yes, many. Don't cheat, that's right. Yeah, for example, one of them, right? Yeah. Anyway, so let's look at the textbook definition of, or the dictionary definition in this case. It's the discipline of dealing with what is good and bad and with moral duty and obligation. So we kind of have a duty towards others, towards people, planet, people and the planet, actually, animals included, right? We have ethical duty and obligations to do the right thing, right? It's the discipline concerned with what is moral, what is morally good and bad, and morally right and wrong. The term is also applied to any system or theory of moral values and principles, right? Moral principles that govern a person's behavior or the conducting of an activity. So everybody has kind of values, morals, values, what they believe in, what they grew up with, what they think is right and wrong. It's, it all sounds really good. You just do the right thing. But sometimes two people don't agree what would be the right thing to do, right? Because people have different values and different value systems. And that's where the ethical dilemma comes in, right? So when you look at your personal code of ethics, so the questions you should ask yourself, one of them is about your base character. What characteristics would others use to describe you? Here's some examples: honest, reliable, kind, or self-centered, aggressive, courageous. How would other people describe you? Think of one term in your mind right now, how other people would describe you. In terms of ethics, right? Beliefs. What are the most important beliefs you hold and that you use to make decisions in your life, right? Here are just some things. Nice guys finish last. Hard work always pays off. We must stand for the right against wrong. Do you have any slogan in mind that you may have heard that companies use, or maybe you have your own personal belief that you apply when you are faced with ethical decisions, or faced with a question, what is the right thing to do? Any maybe if you think about where your beliefs came from, that could maybe trigger a little more. Where did your beliefs and your view of your character come from? Family, religion, movies, personal experience, or people you admire? Where did your beliefs come from? Or values, your values. Anybody want to share? A lot of you probably have similar sources of beliefs and values. Somebody throw some out there. Family, yes, family is a big one, right? Yeah, our family beliefs are impregnated on us, or imprinted on us, I should say, right? That's the right word. Until we're about 7 years old, and then we kind of start making up our own mind slowly, right? So family is a big one. The environment, your friends, your peers, the groups you belong to. Some people are religious, for some people it's religion, right? Yeah. So, and then behavior. How do your relationships reflect your characters and beliefs? So I have mostly shallow relationships because I tend to not follow through with my commitments, right? Or I have many deep, long-lasting friendships because I value friendship and work hard to take care of my friends. these are kind of strange statements, I have to say, from the textbook, because we go through different phases in our lives, and sometimes we're more, some people are more introvert and they have a hard time communicating and working on their relationships. That doesn't mean they're bad people. So just because you're having a hard time connecting with people or keeping your friends doesn't mean you're not an ethical person. So don't really, take these statements with a grain of salt. The things we should focus on, maybe that you're not following through on your commitments, or you are following through on your commitments. If you promise something to a friend, if you say, yes, I will go on a hike with you tomorrow morning, and then you don't show up, that's not nice, right? That would not be ethical. But if you do show up, even though you had to stay up late because you were finishing a paper that was due the next morning or something like that, you still go on the hike because you value your friendship and you stick to your commitment. So, right? We're going to talk more about it from a business perspective, of course. So personal ethics in business. So what happens? What would happen if you're asked to act against your ethics? Your manager asks you to do something. How many of you have a job? Give me examples what you do. What's your job? I'm sorry? You handle cash. You're a cashier at a cash register? At the coffee shop. Okay, so and you're in charge of the cash. That's a good example. Okay, so what if you're a supervisor who's probably not the owner, right? Or are you the supervisor, or?
You're the shift.
You're the shift supervisor. You report probably to the manager of the coffee shop, who probably is not the owner, right? Okay, so what about your manager asks you, Jazzy, when customers pay in cash, don't put that in, don't ring it up. Put it aside and then we'll split it. The owner won't know. And, you make minimum wage, probably not minimum wage, but let's assume you're making minimum wage and you need extra money because your landlord just raised your rent and now you need extra money. And here's your manager giving you an opportunity to make extra cash. And she encourages you to do it because she wants the extra cash too, right? And the owner will never find out because they paid cash. And a coffee is like, you don't count inventory on coffee.
Actually had a situation like
You had a situation like that.
our previous manager has stolen our deposits.
Wow.
So we were low on deposits.
Wow, a previous manager has stolen deposits. Yeah, obviously that manager got fired, right? Yeah. So, but what if you're asked, I'm not putting you on the spot, anybody in the class, what if you're in that situation? You really need more money, you don't know how you're gonna pay the rent. And now your manager gives you an opportunity to be a little unethical, and you have learned not to steal because that is stealing, right? But you really need the money. What would you do? Aaron?
I'm gonna give him a chance to go forward to the manager and confess his sins, or I'm gonna snitch.
Oh, you are even, yeah, you're a toughie, yeah. Well, yeah, so there are a lot of problems with that, right? If a supervisor gets accused by an employee without proof, unfortunately, they might not believe it, or the supervisor could say, well, they just don't, they got mad at me because I didn't give them the shift, so now they're trying to get back at me. No, people lie, especially unethical people lie. Obviously, that is an unethical request of the manager to make anyway. So if you did that, that manager is going to lie about it if you snitch on them, right? Yeah.
I'd probably be more clever. If
Yeah,
they
of
asked me
course.
again, I'd record them or like.
Yeah, something like that.
Yeah, I'd be more smart about it. But,
Yes, absolutely, or maybe have a witness or something, another employer, right? Anyway, obviously, hopefully you wouldn't do anything wrong. What if you knowingly do something unethical or even illegal? And how many of you have ever done anything unethical or illegal or against the law? How many of you have done anything that was against the law? Me. I have. Just a few of you. What have you all done against the law? Yeah, ran a red light.
So South Africa, it's pretty normal to bribe. It's pretty normal to bribe cops, and it's pretty normal to
And
drink
you've done
and
it.
drive.
Oh,
I haven't done it, but I've been in a car where
you bribed So your
Yeah,
friend didn't
but
get you.
it's not like you can run a stoplight or a red light, and then they'll be like, "Do you want some KFC?" And then they'll be like, "Yeah, sure." So. It's like-
Matt, you raised your hand?
Speeding?
Speeding, yeah, that definitely was my thing against the law, yeah, yeah. I once stole something too from a department store, long story, but I was a child, well, not a child, I was 13 years old and you know, you do stuff like that and then you get caught and you never do it again. Yeah, it was, you know, now you all are wondering, right? I'm recording myself, yeah. I was out with a friend from school who was like he was 2 or 3 grade, I think 2 grades higher. And we went shopping and I wanted to buy my brother a CD for his birthday. It was my brother's birthday. And he had I don't know, he was kleptomaniac, right? He had a problem. He was doing it all the time. And he goes, "Oh, just put it in your bag. You don't need to pay." And then I had a bag because I had bought something else on that shopping day, right? And he just slid it in my bag, right? I'm like, "Oh, that's easy, you know." And then we walked out, and then some big white guys came and stopped us on the way exiting the department store, and they, you know, took us to security, and then they called the police, and then they called our parents. It was really, really scary, you know. And then we had to go to court, and you know, my friend admitted that he made me that he put it in my bag and everything like that, right? And then I had to write an essay why stealing is wrong, and I think he had to do some community services or something like that, yeah. But that was my story. That was the only time like that I stole like that in my life. But other than that, I think traffic violations are probably most common with all people that drive at one point or another, right? But and I knowingly speed. When I speed, I know I'm speeding, right? So anyway, identifying a company's ethics. So what do companies do? How can you examine a company's ethics? Right, you're going to graduate one day and you're going to look for a job, and you probably want to work for a company who has a good reputation and good ethics, because it's not fun to work for a company that doesn't. You don't feel good working for a company that cheats and does the wrong thing, or where the values don't match with yours, right? So you want to do some research. So you can look at their code of ethics. Most companies have a statement of the company's commitment to ethical practices. Mission statements define the core purpose of an organization. Every company, and when you go on their website, you can look up their mission statement. What is their mission? Why do they exist? Talking about Google's mission statement, I don't know if it's still like that, but it was something to the effect that they want to connect, they want to make information available to everybody in the world, something like that, right? So, you know, fire departments or police departments, their ethics statement is usually something like we exist to serve and protect, right? That's the only reason why we exist, right? And then how else can you examine a company's ethics besides what they say about themselves on their website? What else can you look at? I mean, maybe you can talk to people that work there, if you know people that work there. You can look at the news. Google them in the news and see, Google them in the news, right? And see if there are any negative news about the company, right? Corporate social responsibility, there are different pillars that they look at. Human rights and employment standards in the workplace, very, very important, because companies have employees, right? And the larger they are, the more employees they have, and the more important it becomes that they have standards in place. Ethical standards, right? Ethical sourcing and procurement. Where do they get the supplies from, or where do they manufacture goods? A lot of American companies are not really following this, because they're buying supplies or manufacturing in countries that, for example, practice child labor or forced labor, or where employees aren't paid properly, where they work in horrible conditions. We all have products by these companies. What are some of the products we use that are sourced like that? Many. Our phones, yes, very much so. What else? Yes,
Clothes.
our clothes, yeah, big one. Clothes and technology, right? Phones, computers, clothes, cars even, right? Yeah. Marketing and consumer issues. You know, companies have to treat their consumers properly. And they can't send untrue marketing messages. Environmental health and safety concerns, both internally and within the company and externally. How are they treating the environment, right? And commitment to good neighbor policy. You know, treating the community they exist in ethically. So these are the pillars of corporate social responsibility. So what are the benefits? You know, that all that stuff costs money, right? It's effort. They have actually teams that work on these statements, and they have teams that ensure that they do things properly. That's all consuming resources to do that. But there are some benefits, right? Companies will have a positive reputation in the marketplace. When you have a positive reputation, naturally you have more strong recruitment and talent retention. People that work for an ethical company or for a company with a good reputation are more likely to, well, first of all, want to work there if they're not working there already. If they work there, they probably want to stay there because an ethical company is going to treat their employees properly and the customers and all the other stakeholders, the community and so forth, right? And the suppliers, right? Efficiency increases when companies use materials efficiently and minimize waste. This is especially true when it comes to how companies treat the environment, right? A lot of companies are looking for ways how they can produce or make goods out of recycled materials and how they can make goods to reduce waste. We have too much waste, which is a big problem to our global warming. Waste is a big problem. Emissions is a big problem. Transportation cost is a big problem, right? How can we reduce our transportation costs? How can we reduce our waste, right? And then you'll have increased sales via product innovation and environmentally and ethically conscious labeling. If a product is not much more expensive than the competition, which provides the same kind of quality, I'm more likely to buy from the company that sources ethically, for example, right? I'm even willing to spend just a little bit more if I know that they're doing these versus buying from the company that does everything against corporate social responsibility, right? Sometimes in our lives, we might not be able to afford to buy the more expensive one, which is fine. But you know what can you do? As a consumer, whether you have money or not, regardless of your budget, what can you do? Tell me a few things, a couple of things, what you can do to reduce waste on the planet, to reduce pollution. What can you do? Simple things. Maybe you can't buy the more expensive sweater because it's ethically sourced, but you can do other things. Maybe you can just buy one sweater instead of 3 sweaters that are unethically sourced, right? For example, we don't need that much stuff in life. We all have so much stuff, clothes, things, knickknacks, right? That all, consumerism, right?
So information.
Hmm?
Have too much information.
Too much, yeah, information too, right, yeah. And the other thing is there are always secondhand stores that have really, really great prices, right? And that's people. It's a kind of a trend to shop in secondhand stores, more so in Europe, I think, than here. When I was in London last 2 semesters ago, it's such a trend to shop in secondhand stores, and you get really cool things, right? Yeah. Maybe if you go to places like LA and things like that, they do have that. Maybe a little bit here, but why not? All you gotta do is put it in the laundry, and it's like clean and new, right? So Anyway, there's lots of stuff. You know, one of the things I always tell my students, stop using disposable water bottles. Don't buy water bottles. You're not buying water, you're buying the bottle. The water is almost free that's inside of it. You know, all the water bottle waste. I see one on the table. You don't have to hide it, it's okay. Buy a reusable bottle and fill it up at home yourself, right? You can reduce so much waste. Anyway, challenge of corporate social responsibility, balancing demands of social responsibility and continuing successful business practices. You can, it costs money to be socially responsible sometimes. In the short term, in the long term, if companies do it right, they will succeed and it will actually benefit them, right? But conflicting demands poses numerous ethical challenges, making life-saving drugs available to the world's poor, for example. Conducting a profitable business in an environmentally sound manner. It's challenging. It's not just simple, oh, we're just going to be environmentally friendly. We're not going to do this and this and this. But what are the alternatives? And how much is it going to cost? And if it's cost too much, maybe consumers aren't going to buy your product anymore. So there's always a balancing act there, right? Effects, the environmental effects, you have obviously a local effect, direct local effect, and then a global effect. Economic effect is product availability, price, and quality could change. Business sustainability, usually when you're more ethical and really have a good ethical strategy, especially if you're making products, if you're manufacturing, long-term it pays off, right? So you're more sustainable, right? Employee morale, of course, you provide advancement to employees, provide a safe and friendly work environment, and have values in place that all of your employees, no matter at what level they are, will follow. So UN business ethics or ethics in general, you can, you might not be able to change what companies do, but there are stuff that you can do, any individual can do. You can change your own ethical behavior by deciding where you're going to buy from, what you're going to buy, how much you're going to buy, where you're going to work. At one point in your life, maybe not your first job out of college, where you're going to actually have a choice of where are you going to work. You're just going to get the job, the company that offers you the job. But, after a while, you collect experience, you become more marketable in a job place, you become maybe specialized in a certain area. You can actually choose what type of companies you want to work for, right? So, I skipped that. I skipped who you work for, who you do business with, who you buy from, and then who you invest in, right? At one point, you're going to have money that you're going to invest in other companies, right? Buy stocks maybe, and things like that. Do you want to invest your company in, your money in companies that are unethical or ethical? You have a choice, right? There's a topic of legal and regulatory compliance. Laws are created to govern industries and products, right? Examples, we have the Consumer Bill of Rights, which protects consumers that companies have to follow. If you take my business law class, we go over that when we cover consumer law, but consumers have the right to safe products, right? So which means companies have to go through a certain extent to make sure that the products they put out on the market available for consumers, that they are safe for them to use. Right to choose. We have the right to choose to buy from this versus that company, unless there's a monopoly, right? Right to information. There's information that a seller has to provide about the product, the ingredients, where it was manufactured. With food products, you look at the food label. Companies don't put that there because they feel it's a great idea. They put that there because of the Consumer Bill of Rights. They have to provide nutritious information, for example, right? And right to be heard. So if a consumer feels injured because a company violated one of these, they can go to court, right? Legal compliance means conducting a business within the boundaries of all legal regulations of that industry. Large companies have legal departments that make sure, they have compliance departments, actually. They make sure that the companies comply with the laws that govern that industry. Violations have, most of you probably weren't alive when Enron happened. That was 2000, maybe 2000, I think it was 2000 or 2001. It was a company like PG&E, right, an energy company. And they committed fraud with their finance practices. And when it came out, the company went bankrupt, right? What they did is they backdated stocks. First, they inflated their stock and the value and things like that, right? So people would invest in that company, right? People had their 401ks and all that kind of money invested into Enron. And when it came out that the company wasn't doing so well, there was insider trading, which means, if you're an insider, if you work within the company, certain things that are happening. You have an advantage, so you can trade before it becomes public knowledge, which is illegal, by the way, right? So you can't do that, right? Anyway, key officers were found guilty, and on top of that, their accounting firm who helped them cook the books, they call it, right? Report fake numbers, basically. Arthur Andersen also was convicted. They also went out of business, right? It was one of the top 3 accounting firms in the world back then. Right? After that, the Sarbanes-Oxley Act passed with strict corporate financing requirements and penalties, and it's in regards to making information public, reporting, and having a independent auditor and not one that's kind of working for the company or anything like that. So whistleblower protection. So if somebody blows the whistle on the company, they can't retaliate against that person, and different types of regulations that public companies now have to follow. We still have had many ethical issues with large companies since then, right? Maybe not exactly in that way, but similar ways. People find a way to cheat, right? New markets and ethical focus. There are market opportunities because companies are becoming more, consumers are becoming more aware of how ethical companies are, right? And consumers have choices, so companies are motivated to do better, right? So and there are different industries offering clean fuel, right? Creating medical vaccines, fighting censorship, going green, right? Those are some of the things that companies can do to make money, industries they can go after. Can you think of any other examples what a company could do? Or a new business opportunity, Shayna?
Being cruelty-free.
Being cruelty-free, yes, towards animals, right? And you don't have to necessarily be vegetarian or vegan, but there's cruelty-free sourced meat, right? I don't know how cruelty-free that can be. At the end, you still have to kill the animal. But at least you're maybe less cruel than the factory farms, which are horrendous, by the way. All right. And then steps to make sure employees get a good start when they start working. There's a code of ethics at each company. Companies have mission statements, as I said before, and orientation programs should cover ethical standards and what's okay and what's not okay, right? Communicating regularly to employees about acceptable behavior. Check to make sure that the code of ethics is being followed. If there are any violations, make sure you stop them immediately. Create a hotline for anonymous reports. Even though there's a law against retaliation against whistleblowers, people are still worried if they report something that they're going to lose their job or being retaliated against. So have anonymous hotlines where employees can report things if they see that things are going wrong, right? And have ongoing ethics training, right? Okay, that's it. I'm going to stop this the recording now, and then we can do our discussion.